Namaskar and welcome to Sansad Television. I am Vishal Dahiya and you're watching our show Perspective, where we bring you details of key national and international issues as well. Today we're going to talk about the upper house, that is Rajya Sabha. Now, the upper house of the parliament, that is Rajya Sabha, was constituted on 3rd of April 1952 and the first session was held on 13th May 1952. Since then, it has contributed to the welfare and progress of the country in many ways. Also known as the Council of States, a nomenclature that was announced by the chair in the House on 23rd of August 1954, Rajya Sabha has its own distinctive features and reflects the federal character of our polity and protects the right of the states as well. The origin of the second chamber can be traced to a Montague-Chelmsford Report of 1918. In fact, an extensive debate took place in the Constituent Assembly regarding the utility or otherwise of a second chamber in independent India, and ultimately it was decided to make a bicameral legislature for independent India, mainly because a federal system was considered to be most feasible form of government for such a vast country with immense diversities as well. Now, in this glorious journey so far, Rajya Sabha has passed several important legislations related to social change, economic transformation as well, agriculture, health, education, environment, science and technology, national security, and of course, matters related to the states also. In today's episode, we will discuss and analyze the journey, the significance and the achievements of the upper house of parliament. And for more on this, we're joined by a distinguished panel of guests today. Let me first introduce them to you. Beginning with, we have with us Mr. Sasmit Patra, Rajya Sabha MP from BJD. Welcome, Mr. Patra, to Sansad TV studios. We're also joined by Mr. Vivek Tankha. He is a member of the upper house from Indian National Congress. And Mr. Deshdeepak Verma, former Secretary General of Rajya Sabha, is also joining us. Welcome, both of you gentlemen, as well to Sansad Television. I'll like to start with you, Mr. Tankha, and let's start by, I've given some, inference to the origin of the upper house, the Montague-Chelmsford Report as well, and the Constituent Assembly debate. But if you could take us through, go back a little bit in the history and take us through about the concept of the upper house, the origin, and of course, the significance.
Thank you, Vishalji. Now, it's a very important day today from the point of view of Indian Federation. Rajya Sabha has its own place and role in the legislative map of India. Lok Sabha is important, but Rajya Sabha is no less important. While Lok Sabha represents the voice of the people directly, Rajya Sabha, which is a council of state, actually it should be representing the voice of states. Now, states have a lot of issues. India is a federation of states, more unitary than federal, but yet it is a federation of states. Center has an overarching influence in all affairs, but at the same time, states have their own independent role. List 2 in the Constitution defines, gives or delineates all the state subjects where legislative competence is there. List 3, this is the concurrent list, is where the center and the state both can legislate together.
Okay. So
I don't see state as subordinate governments at all. I see states as independent units of government. And the Rajya Sabha, these independent units of government send their representative to voice their issues and concerns. But as I said, in India, we have a party system. So when you come as a part of a party system, very objectively speaking, you start speaking as a spokesman of the party and not necessarily every time as spokesman of the state. Unlike US, where you are more attached to the state rather than to the party, though ultimately there also the party supervenes. To that extent, there is a dilution in the concept of the representation in the Rajya Sabha.
Okay.
But more important is the level of debates in the Rajya Sabha have always been very high because you were able to nominate people. In Lok Sabha, you have to wait. It's the people's choice which decides who should win. Of course, today it's party's choice because of certain situations. But theoretically, it's the people's choice. People vote for an individual.
Okay.
But in Rajya Sabha, you can pick up an individual. You can pick up people who are good in law. You can pick up people who are professors, who are good in medicine, who are social activists, who are authors, who are actors. You have those 10 presidential nominations of eminent people, players. So Rajya Sabha has a lot of free play.
Okay.
In that sense.
Okay.
But where the concept of Rajya Sabha got diluted, though it was again by consensus of all the parties, is when they amended the law to say that even if you're not a voter of a particular state and you're a voter of another state, but you can still get elected to Rajya Sabha of a particular state without being a voter.
Okay.
Now that essentially was not the concept of Rajya Sabha as it stood and as it was formed, that you necessarily should be belonging to that state, you should be a representative of that state, because this dilution took place because of necessity of times, the necessity of parties to bring in senior leaders who otherwise maybe were not getting elected from their states.
Okay.
But nevertheless, it was a dilution of the concept of Rajya Sabha.
Okay, we'll come to that part as well, Mr. Tanka. We'll come to that part also. That's a very significant point which you're making in terms of what has changed and the positive and negative aspect of it as well. Sasmit ji, I'd like to bring you on that. But before we do that, Sasmit, let me bring in Deshdeepak Verma ji here. Deshdeepak Verma ji, before we move on to that part, it would be prudent for us to understand another aspect of the upper house and its functioning as well, vis-a-vis the lower house, that's the Lok Sabha. And if you could make us understand the relation between both houses and what distinguishes upper house in terms of the special powers it has in special provisions and how they are acted upon in certain situations.
Yes, Vishalji, as you have rightly said, that both Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha are the twin arms of the parliament, and most of the legislatures, except the money bills, have to be passed by both the houses before it becomes a law. So both houses have equally important roles, except in the money bills, where the Lok Sabha has some more powers, some special powers. But the Rajya Sabha also has distinct features. There are certain provisions which do not exist in the Lok Sabha, which are the special powers of the Rajya Sabha. For example, like that we have the state list, the center list, and the concurrent list. And mostly the state and the center have their domains for making legislature. But even in the state list, with 2/3 majority, the Rajya Sabha has the power to make legislation in case it is decided for 1 year and now it's probably extended by 1 more year. So it can remain there. So that is one special feature of the Rajya Sabha.
Okay.
The other very important feature is that this can make laws and can create All India services. So the All India Service and the Indian Police Service, Indian Forest Service, all these are the services which have been created through the legislation of the Rajya Sabha.
Okay.
That's a very special power. And also in the situations of emergency, and there is a warlike situation, such situations are where the Lok Sabha does not exist because of certain reasons. In such exigencies, the Rajya Sabha also has the exclusive lawmaking powers. So these are the things which distinguishes Rajya Sabha from the Lok Sabha.
Okay.
Otherwise, both houses have equal powers in terms of the legislations, in terms of the bills. The only difference is in terms of the money bills, which the Lok Sabha has the powers. And when it comes to the Rajya Sabha is supposed to deliberate on this and then return with its recommendations to the Lok Sabha. But if it does not consider this in 14 days' time, then it is deemed to have been passed. It goes back, it is returned to it is called return to the Lok Sabha.
Okay.
And the Lok Sabha, then it becomes a law. Okay. So that is the basic difference between the powers of the Rajya Sabha and the Lok Sabha.
Okay, that pretty much gives us a clear picture of how both the houses function. But Sasmit, on the journey part, in terms of how the upper house has contributed for the nation's development and the polity and legislations as well? And what has changed, including the point made by Vivek Tankhaji here in terms of certain changes, perhaps, they were done with a particular view, but as Mr. Tankhaji is pointing out, that they might not have had that impact.
You see, there are 3 or 4 areas I'd like to quickly mention. The first area is time. What happens is when you talk about the Lok Sabha, the members of parliament who are directly elected from their constituencies, many times they have to also go back to the constituency even during the session. So what really happens is that the kind of time that they can provide to the parliament in terms of deliberation is also considerably less. Also, the kind of involvement that members of parliament from Lok Sabha can do due to constituency pressures in committee meetings, etc., is also considerably less. So therefore, what happens, Rajya Sabha, in terms of its importance in involvement, in engagement, in ensuring that more of its members of parliament are definitely inside the parliament, attending the committee meetings, ensuring that they're part of participation. So one is the time factor. The second aspect is the voice of the states. When Rajya Sabha was thought of as a council of states, I come from Odisha, come from Biju Janata Dal. We have a government there, but we are not in the opposition here right now. So what really happens is the voice of the state in terms of governance has to find resonance at Delhi inside the parliament. So Rajya Sabha in its journey has always tried to be the vanguard of that voice, where federalism as a structure, federalism as a spirit finds resonance inside the parliament. I think that's the second aspect where as a council of states, it's been truly remarkable. That's a journey.
Okay.
The third is in terms of the kind of people that Manya Tankhaji was also speaking about is when you talk about the nominated members, the 12 members were nominated by the president. They bring the expertise to the house from different fields. When you look at the members of parliament who are actually nominated, the parties, the respective parties also when they send, they look at them in terms of political process, but also in terms of the kind of impact that they will do. And fourth, of course, legislation. Many a times when there is a brute majority in the Lok Sabha and bills can be easily passed, but there is a check and balance that has been provided by the Rajya Sabha. Where when it hits the Rajya Sabha, because of the kind of numbers that always has a vetting, a veto kind of a thing, not a veto, but a vetting kind of a thing. And that somewhere checks that unbridled speed of legislation and calls into question that whether this legislation has been rightly passed and the merits and the demerits are properly discussed. And the division of votes, because it's much more tighter in the Rajya Sabha, historically, if you see, that also helps the opposition to become more proactive and effective, especially if the government of the day has a brute majority in the Lok Sabha.
Okay. Now that's a very important point there. And Tankhaji, on the aspect of the upper house acting as the check and balance part of the overall constitutional federal structure which we have, if you could, take us through and highlight as to how things have happened. And there are various aspects when we look at, major legislations which have been cleared by the upper house, in almost all sectors, be it health, education, science and technology, national security as well, social change. There are various aspects. And there have been occasions when, bills passed by Lok Sabha have been, have come under a lot of scrutiny in the upper house.
Well, Rajya Sabha had a different function, not the same function as Lok Sabha, by way of its architecture and by way of its composition. First of all, it's a permanent house. It's never that Rajya Sabha stands dissolved. Every 2 years, 1/3 member retire and new set of 1/3 member come in. So there is a permanency to the house. All members do not retire together. All members do not come back together. So there is lot more coherence and lot more consistency. Number two, for a party which may win a majority in Lok Sabha, as Shushmitji rightly said, and Vermaji was also mentioning, it may win a majority in Lok Sabha, but to gain a majority in Rajya Sabha may still take more time, because Rajya Sabha essentially has representatives of states. So you need to have majority in the state governments to get more and more MPs in your fold in the Rajya Sabha. That may not happen or may happen. You can have governments which will rule Delhi but may not be ruling majority of the states. So dispersal of membership of Rajya Sabha across parties can be a feature which is not too uncommon. So that is why, by its very nature and composition, Rajya Sabha would always be like a fetter. I won't call it a roadblock because blocking something is not correct. But a lot of times, in its wisdom, when you have huge majority, you like to rush through legislations, which a lot of wise people may feel it's too hasty, should not have been pushed, it needed more consultation. But that's the way the Lok Sabha would look at it. But when it comes to Rajya Sabha, you will have people who have been there for a long time, who are researchers, who are thinkers, who are lawyers, who are doctors, who are social activists, who are players. So there is always a rethink that is it too fast? Should it happen now? Should there be a better discussion? Should we send it to the select committee? Should we send it to or make a JPC? We've had so many JPCs formed this time through Rajya Sabha route also. So that's why I'm saying Rajya Sabha has been a great restraint in an otherwise a democracy which could get rolled because of a majority in Lok Sabha.
Okay.
So Rajya Sabha, in a sense, is representative of the country through the states and acts as a restraint and a fetter to anything which the country would feel would harm the interest of the states.
Okay. Now that both of you have put those points in perspective, specifically as to the significance and then why it happens, whatever happens in Rajya Sabha vis-a-vis the opposition and the government stance as well on various issues aspects. Let's also listen into Mr. Deshdeepak Verma here. He's been there as the senior most officer inside the house. Mr. Verma, in your experience, the way you have seen it being there in the house, how would you describe not only the functioning but also the significance of that functioning vis-a-vis various legislations which come in from the lower house for deliberations, or those also which originate in the upper house, and various aspects taken into consideration, be it as Mr. Tankaji was referring to, sending it to committees or giving a go-ahead to the legislation?
Yes, I'll respond to that. But before that, I would like to make a comment on what Tankaji said and also Patraji said, that it is true. In fact, Mr. Patra had a slip of tongue when he said veto, and what he meant was actually vetting.
Yeah.
So we have to also see that whether the Rajya Sabha should be vetoing or vetting the legislations which come from the Rajya Sabha, which come from the lower house. As both of them were saying, honorable members, they were saying that there is also an issue that the Rajya Sabha gets the same kind of structure or complexion as the Lok Sabha in not less than 5 years. In fact, 4 and 5 years is an underestimate. It is more than 7 and 8 years, and sometimes they do not get the same mandate throughout. So therefore, at some point of time, I think we might discuss maybe in this debate or some other debate as to how we can, there have been some discussions, some recommendations as to how we can reconstitute or think of reconstituting the Rajya Sabha so that it becomes a deliberating and a vetting body in the true sense. And we can add to the discussions, add to the value of the lawmaking, rather than having only roadblocks here and there. So this is, of course, not saying that that this was being done in a period X or in a period Y, but all the time, what we need to do is constructively think about this problem and try to solve this issue.
Okay.
Now, coming back to the point that you have raised, yes, in the Rajya Sabha debates have always been very illuminating. Right from the Constituent Assembly days and right up to now, we see that the debates on different subjects have been very illuminating, and many a times the decision to refer it to the joint committee, decision to refer it to the select committee, that has been taken in the Rajya Sabha. Many a times also, I can't remember the specific instances where the matter has been referred to the Lok Sabha, and during this period, the Lok Sabha also had reconsidered, rethought on the recommendations which have been made at the Rajya Sabha, and have put some quality into the legislation, and the laws which have come back again after to the Rajya Sabha had those provisions incorporated, those recommendations made by the Rajya Sabha. So it has been making a very significant contribution in the lawmaking right since beginning, and even now, even though many people talk of the disruptions in the House and disruptions, but all said and done, the contributions made by the Rajya Sabha, especially through the debates, which I have the privilege of listening to for 4 years, including the ones from Mr. Tankha and Mr. Patra, those have been very enriching for everybody, not only for the people who are listening in the House, but for the entire nation, which have been listening to those recommendations and those discussions.
Okay. So very enriching and very quality debates there as well. Sasmit, final question to you, and you've been there in the House, you're still there. In terms of the way the House functions, the upper house functions, and its rules and regulations, what is required, what is not required. We've spoken about significance, its relation to the lower house as well. In your views, what more can be done?
You see, firstly, I'd like to thank Deshdeepak Verma ji, because he was my Secretary General in the earlier, just a few months back, and I had the privilege and the pleasure. And of course, Vivek Tankha ji, and sitting actually in this kind of an audience with them always is illuminating. One thing I always believe is we need to spend more time in debate and discussions inside Rajya Sabha. The 3 years that I have been here in Rajya Sabha, I would say some of the most historic bills were passed in 2019. People can have either view on it, whether it was right or wrong. Abrogation of 370, CAA, triple talaq, RT amendments, you name it, all of them happened in 2019. And the quality of debate, again, I do not want to go into the idea of disruptions or discussion, but I believe if Rajya Sabha has to truly, stand up to the potential of being the Rajya Sabha and not be another better form of the Lok Sabha, then disruptions have to reduce. I do understand that political parties will have their options, but I have always felt that discussion instead of disruptions, if it happens, because the quality, I'll tell you something, Vivek Tankha ji was there on the private members bill just a couple of days back, and the kind of debate when it happens on private members bill, where there is no politics, it's like that is a kind of time when you have the private member resolution, private members bill, when people speak outside, they're not constrained by party lines. The level of debate just rises. I believe what Deshdeepak Verma ji said, it is illuminating to just hear the kind of debate. So I believe Rajya Sabha should be a voice of the states. More and more voices should come in. And I'm very thankful to the chairman of Rajya Sabha, Shri Venkaiah Naidu ji. Why? Because he has always encouraged the use of regional languages. People like us coming from Odisha, we speak in Odia, somebody speaks in Telugu, someone in Tamil. That is truly India. It's not only English and Hindi is India. All the regional languages coming together, that's one. And the level of debate, the kind of time spent for debate, and the kind of extent of depth of debate. I believe unless we do that, we will not be able to take these debates more illuminatingly into the country. So it's my personal opinion that we need to spend less on disruptions, more on debates that will restore a lot of confidence on the democracy itself.
Okay, and that is something which the chairman of Rajya Sabha has also been pointing out very repeatedly, that debate and discussion is the way forward, not disruption. Thank you so much, Mr. Sasmit Patra, Mr. Vivek Tankha, and Mr. Deshdeepak Verma as well for sharing your views and insight with us and our viewers here. As our panelists were pointing out, clearly Rajya Sabha, that is the upper house, has a very glorious history in terms of the achievements when we talk about the legislations passed, the debates which were held on key issues related to both states as well as national issues also. And of course, a lot more needs to be done. Perhaps disruption is one area which we can further look forward to in terms of not going ahead there and rather pressing on with debate and discussions, as our experts were also saying, and the chairman Rajya Sabha has also been pointing out. We'll come back again with a different topic, but we'll also keep you updated on all the developments in not only the upper house, but the lower house as well. Thank you, and keep watching Sansad Television.